Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to break down how Manchester United destroyed Sheffield United and how Nemanja Matic played a key role in all of it. When we break down the game, we have Sheffield United in a 3-5-2 and Manchester United operating in a 4-2-3-1. We knew what we were going to get out of Sheffield United in that 3-5-2. Without the ball, they would drop off into more of a 5-3-2. They would have the forwards looking to drop off and block off the passing lanes into Pogba and Matic. So you would see more of a box in that midfield zone so that Pogba and Matic couldn't get on the ball. Because in that midfield zone, the battles were set. You had Fleck who could step out to Pogba, Lundstrom who could step out into the path of Matic, and then you had Norwood tracking the movement of Bruno Fernandes. In that 5-3-2, what you end up seeing is that Fleck and Lundstrom are responsible for shifting out to the fullbacks if they push forward. But what you wanted here was the wingbacks to step out into the path of Luke Shaw and Wan-Bissaka pushing forward. The problem that Sheffield United had with that was the fact that when you look at how Manchester United set up their attacking players, you had Rashford and Greenwood in those gaps between the wingbacks and the wider center backs. And then you had Martial looking to dart into space between the center backs, whether it be Robinson and Jagielka or between Jagielka and Basham. So ultimately, the Sheffield United wingbacks were forced to stay a bit deeper because if they did look to push out to Shaw or Wan-Bissaka, then that would leave gaps for Greenwood and Rashford to dart into by dragging out Robinson and Basham. And then that also leaves gaps for Bruno Fernandes to shift into. Bruno Fernandes didn't have to drop off deeper into that midfield zone based off the fact that Pogba and Matic were on the field, and we'll get to that in a second. So he was predominantly floating laterally in between the lines, looking to drop into space behind the shuttlers or behind the wingbacks. And there were times where you did see him darting into space between Basham and Jagielka or Basham and Baldock. So when we look to Manchester United, there were two ways they could go about this game. They could drop off deeper and force Sheffield United forward. And the reason why they would do that is because Sheffield United are renowned for having their wider center backs in Robinson and Basham join the attack. So what you end up doing there is that you have protection from the fullbacks and you can have the shuttler shifting out. But then if you have Greenwood and Rashford dropping off a bit deeper, you ensure that they can't have any 3v2 advantages out in those zones. The problem here for Sheffield United, and we did witness this on 2 occasions within those opening 15 minutes, was that if those players lose the ball, or if any Sheffield United player loses the ball, then the gaps out in the channels are vacant for Rashford, Greenwood, and Martial to break into, because the only players that Sheffield United had back was Jagielka and the holding center back, and then Norwood following the movement of Bruno Fernandes. However, for large spells of this game, United were tasked with breaking down the Sheffield United defense. And what we ended up seeing here was the difference between this game and Spurs was the fact that Solskjaer went with 3 ball-playing midfielders in that central area. So when you see Sheffield United replicating Spurs' attempt to box in that United double pivot, what ended up happening here was that initially you had Pogba and Matic shift out to the wider zones away from McGoldrick and Mousse. But as that game continued, what you ended up seeing was that Pogba would shift out into that zone and he would be boxed in that midfield. And then you would have Matic either split the center backs or drift out into that left or right channel just ahead of that halfway line. So with Matic constantly shifting out of that pressure in and around that center of the pitch, the reason why he was the key player for United here was that against Spurs, United had difficulties playing through that midfield zone in the first half, and they were forced out into wider areas. Here, Matic was operating as that deep line playmaker, which is his favorite position, and he was able to get United into dangerous zones. But the problem that United had was that when they got into those zones, they were wasteful with that final ball. When we look to one example, you have Matic stepping into that Sheffield United half, and he's closed down by Lundstrom and McGoldrick, and he simply plays a reverse splitting pass to find Bruno Fernandes between Fleck and Norwood between the lines. When Bruno Fernandes receives that ball, he locates Martial darting across Robinson, and he tries to play a defensive splitting pass, but Jagielka gets a foot on it, and that kills the danger. When we look to another example, it's Matic ahead of that Sheffield United midfield, and you have Pogba near Norwood. What you see from Matic here is that he ends up splitting Lundstrom and Norwood to find Bruno Fernandes dropping off Basham and quickly backheeling the ball across Jagielka into the path of Rashford. When Rashford receives that ball, Jagielka does slip, and it allows Rashford to play that ball back to Pogba pushing forward because Norwood was attracted to the ball. And then you see Rashford spin across Jagielka so that Pogba could chip the ball over Robinson and Jagielka for Rashford breaking into that box. But with Baldock coming across, Rashford scuffs his effort wide. There were another few examples where you end up seeing Wan-Bissaka being closed by Fleck, and Wan-Bissaka instantly squares the ball into the path of Matic, who instantly splits Norwood and Fleck to find Greenwood dropping off of Robinson and Stevens. When Greenwood receives that ball, he ends up playing a reverse splitting pass to try and find Bruno Fernandes peeling off of Stevens, but that pass is cut out. Then you had Matic winning a 50-50 with Lundstrom and instantly splitting Norwood and Fleck to find Bruno Fernandes dropping off between the lines. Fernandes tries to find Rashford breaking him behind, so he plays a pass in between Jagielka and Basham, but Jagielka comes across to make the difference. And if we're being nice, we could say that Matic played a role in that Martial's second goal. It was Luke Shaw who won the header in that left channel, and it was Matic who got to the loose ball before Norwood, before driving into that left channel and pulling out Baldock and Lundstrom, and then he pulled the ball back to Bruno Fernandes. Now, if you're asking if Pogba could have got on the ball in that central midfield zone in that opening half, what you can say is that if you shift out the ball to Wan-Bissaka, then Fleck has to shift out into that zone based off the fact that Greenwood ensured that Stevens wouldn't push forward. So with Greenwood in that position and Fleck being pulled out, all Wan-Bissaka has to do is shift that ball out to Pogba, and similar to what we saw from Matic to create a chance, Pogba has to quickly get on that ball and make a decision as to how he's going to play it forward before Norwood steps into his path. But even when we look to the second half, Sheffield United brought on McBurney, Zivkovic, and Burge, but we didn't see any real tactical evolution in this game. United were able to pass the ball around comfortably, and even when we look to their third goal, this time it involved Pogba dropping off a bit deeper into that back line instead of Matic, who stayed central. It was Pogba just ahead of the halfway line in that right channel before McBurney shifted across, and when Pogba looks up, what he ends up seeing is Greenwood dropping off ahead of Stevens. You have Wan-Bissaka in a more advanced position running across Robinson, and then you see Martial in a gap between Basham and Jagielka, and Rashford ahead of Baldock and Basham. What you also end up seeing is that Bruno Fernandes is between the lines and no one's picking him up. So when Pogba eventually decides to play that pass, he wraps it around Fleck and McBurney to find Bruno Fernandes darting into that gap between Jagielka and Robinson. Jagielka has to track the movement of Bruno Fernandes so that he doesn't receive the ball freely, but he instantly backheels it across Jagielka into the path of Martial, but it's slightly behind him. So when Martial eventually gets control of the ball, you have Basham shifting over, and that's when you kind of see a 2v2 situation that sees Martial square to Rashford, and then Martial run between Basham and Burge into the box to meet the pass of Rashford splitting Baldock and Basham, and he finishes coolly. But that all stems with United having passers in those deeper positions to find Bruno Fernandes and the attacking three in advanced zones, and that was the difference here, and this is a good template for United to utilize against teams that look to drop off deeper against them rather than looking to attack them. Hi everybody, thanks for watching, and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the InnerViews show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the InnerViews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.